If you've spent enough time hiking alone, you learn that the woods have their own language. The wind tells you when a storm is coming. Birds tell you when a predator is nearby. Silence tells you something else entirely. This happened to me in October of 2022, and to this day, I've never been able to explain it. I had planned a 3-day backpacking trip through a section of national forest in Washington that I'd never visited before. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd spent years exploring remote trails, often alone, and I prided myself on being prepared. I carried a GPS, a paper map, a satellite communicator, extra food, and enough gear to survive if things went wrong. The first day was uneventful. The trail wound through towering fir trees, crossed 2 shallow streams, and climbed steadily into higher ground. I saw only one other hiker all afternoon, an older man carrying almost nothing except a walking stick. As we passed each other, he asked where I was headed. "Mile 22, I said. He nodded slowly. "If you reach an old fire tower after mile 18, he said, "don't climb it." Before I could ask what he meant, he continued down the trail. I assumed he was joking. That night I camped near a small creek. The forest was unusually quiet. No owls, no insects. Even the water seemed strangely muted. Around midnight I woke to the sound of footsteps circling my tent. Crunch, pause, crunch. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I called out. No answer. When I finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent, my flashlight revealed nothing except empty woods. The next morning, however, there was a ring of fresh boot prints surrounding my campsite. Only one set. They stopped 10 feet from the tent. There were no tracks leading away. I spent nearly half an hour trying to figure it out before convincing myself the ground was simply too hard to preserve the rest. Around noon I reached the faded wooden marker for mile 18. Just beyond it, hidden between thick pines, was an old maintenance road that wasn't shown on either of my maps. Curiosity got the better of me. The road narrowed quickly before opening into a clearing. In the center stood an old fire lookout. Its wooden supports leaned slightly to one side, and several windows were broken. Rust streaked the metal roof. The staircase looked weathered but intact. I remembered the old hiker's warning. Then I laughed at myself. It was just an abandoned tower. Halfway up the stairs, I noticed something strange. The wood wasn't dusty. Despite years of neglect, each step looked recently swept. At the top, the door stood slightly open. Inside sat an old desk, a rusted cot, and a radio. The radio was impossible. It had no batteries, no visible power source, yet a faint burst of static crackled from its speaker. "Hello?" I froze. More static, then silence. I stepped closer. The radio clicked again. "If anyone hears this," the voice sounded exhausted, "don't stay after sunset." I instinctively looked out the windows. The afternoon sun was already dropping lower than I'd realized. The radio spoke again. "He's still climbing." I rushed outside. The staircase was empty. The clearing below was empty. Nothing moved. When I returned inside, the radio had gone silent. I decided I'd seen enough. As I reached the stairs, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Fresh, muddy footprints. They hadn't been there before. They began at the doorway. They ended beside the radio. Whoever had made them hadn't walked back out. I climbed down much faster than I'd climbed up. Halfway to the trail, I heard the tower door slam. The sound echoed through the forest. When I turned around, someone stood inside the observation room. A tall silhouette, completely motionless, watching me. I couldn't make out a face, only the outline. I raised my binoculars. The room was empty. I lowered them. The figure was back. I didn't look again. I started walking. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not running, walking, matching my pace. Every time I stopped, they stopped. Every time I walked, they followed. I refused to turn around. After nearly 20 minutes, I reached the main trail. The footsteps stopped instantly. Relieved, I continued hiking until dark and made camp beside a small ridge. I barely slept. At exactly 2:14 a.m., my satellite communicator beeped. Someone had sent me a message. There was no sender, just 6 words. WAT-DON and Hinyu Huraini. I checked the device history. The message didn't exist. Only the notification remained. The following morning, I cut the trip short. Back at the ranger station, I mentioned the fire tower. The ranger looked confused. There hasn't been a fire tower in that district since 1986. I insisted I'd climbed it. He unfolded an old survey map. Sure enough, a tower had once stood near mile 18. It burned down during a wildfire nearly 40 years earlier. The lookout stationed there never escaped. Search crews found only the radio, nothing else. I laughed nervously. There must be another tower. The ranger slowly shook his head. There isn't. That night, unable to let it go, I searched old newspaper archives. I eventually found a faded photograph taken after the fire. The burned remains of the tower filled most of the frame. But in one of the broken windows stood a man, tall, motionless, watching the camera. The caption identified him as the missing lookout, except the article explained his body had never been recovered. I zoomed in. My blood ran cold. The clothes, the posture, the impossible stillness. It was the same figure I'd seen in the tower window. I never returned to that forest. Sometimes, when I'm hiking somewhere completely different, my GPS briefly loses signal. For a few seconds, it displays a route that doesn't exist. A narrow trail leading toward a place simply labeled Fire Tower. Then it disappears. I've never followed it, and I never will.